Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Way T Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we are going to talk about male fertility. And, this is an often overlooked aspect of men's health. And the statistics say that approximately 1 in 7 couples are infertile, and half of all known infertility can be attributed to the male factor. So we're going to talk about, we have an expert today that's going to kind of dive into this. It's a topic that I'm very interested in, just on a long-term projection of birth rates, particularly in industrialized countries. We talk about toxins and stuff. I was just listening to some specifics on Brett Weinstein's podcast where he was discussing this with his wife. It's a great resource of science and everything, and they were bringing this topic up. But it's something that I see increasingly more. And you look back history, we see people with 10 kids in the family, and now it's 1 or 2. And is that all industrialization of? Well, we're going to find out today, because today's guest is Tom Smith, who is the CEO and co-founder of Dadi, is an entrepreneur whose work includes growing and selling 2 software companies, the first in 2014 and the second in 2016. He was a member of Apple's first iPhone team. That's pretty cool. Interesting that you got into this topic. So most recently, he was the co-head of a product of a billion-dollar media company, Giphy. And Tom is a board member of Canopy and a strategy advisor to Giphy, along with being a co-founder of Dadi. Tom is responsible for the growth and development of the organization and its employees. Tom is a Toronto native, so am I, now living in Brooklyn, New York, and he graduated from the London School of Economics in 2009, where he received a Bachelor of Science in Managerial Economics and Strategy. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Wade. Yeah, that was the full bio there. So no, thank you. Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Okay, first question off thing. How does a guy working for Apple in the tech industry end up in male fertility?
Yeah, so it's a pretty unconventional, I think, story to a certain degree. And to be clear, I mean, I was straight out of college and I joined the first iPhone team. I was a junior analyst and had a great time learning from some incredible people. By no means that I have a huge strategic impact on the rollout of the iPhone.
Were you ever around Steve Jobs? Did you ever meet him?
I did meet him, yeah. And my first desk in Cupertino was about 150 feet from his office. So I had a very privileged kind of start to my career.
Did he scream at you or yell at you like the legends kind of go? Or
no meetings. So I was spared. I was kind of spared that whole experience. But yeah, I mean, it is an unconventional story, but ultimately I think actually what sparked my interest and really drew me into the industry and space was, I think, fairly similar to your story in a lot of ways, where, very suddenly a close friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer. And it was obviously a shock to the family and to friends and to everyone around them, and ultimately learned about the male fertility journey, the science, the technology, the services through that lens, and really just saw an opportunity to take this 40-year-old industry that had not modernized through that entire time. And what I mean by that is, there was no advancements in, how collection was ultimately done. There was no change to the service structure. The price points were astronomically expensive. And we just saw an opportunity to take, some of the modernization that comes from a lot of the other services out in the world today and apply that to this kind of nascent industry. And that's what really sparked it. And that was about 4.5 years ago. Dadi itself has been live for about 2.5 years. And yeah, certainly trying to push the forefront of this space.
Yes, I just had some interviews recently where we were talking about this from the female perspective, and infertility among being psychologically or socially challenging inside of a relationship when you're trying to have kids or want to have kids. But there's also just the economic costs of, it's like 20,000, 25,000 a shot if you're using in vitro fertilization, which has like a 10% success rate. So you're really, you're playing worse than Vegas odds and at a higher roulette table, I would say, if you go down that route. Before we get into all that stuff, and I love the fact that you're modernizing the industry. And I think if that would be the easy way to do it, using kind of your tech background to say, how do we optimize it? So beyond that, like, what's the problem here? Like, are you clear why infertility is happening much more pervasive than it was before? I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about it. I've read some research on the disappearing male and testosterone levels dropping and the highs of estrogens. There's a lot of research in around the variety of toxins inside of industrialized nations contributing to it. There could be obesity issues contributing, or highly processed food diets. What is it? Like, is it a composite of those, or what are the big factors?
Yeah, I think like anything in the health space, it's rarely attributed to a single factor, but really, multiple different elements that are converging together. With the kind of renewed focus on the space in the last couple of years, there's certainly a lot of research happening right now on this subject. But here's what we kind of do know. At a high level, male fertility counts over the last 40 years have been in steady decline. What that means is, I'm 33 years old. When my father was 33, for example, he was very likely 50% more fertile than I am today. So it had, in simple terms, 50% more sperm in a milliliter of semen. And really, there's certainly a lot of environmental factors. So, toxins and plastics and chemicals are kind of one of the leading factors. But I think what a lot of it also boils down to is health. Like a lot of other things in this space. And, fundamentally, we're living a non-active lifestyle, diets, body mass index, all of these elements are certainly trending in the wrong direction. And what's happening in a lot of cases, along with the environmental factors, are these issues are compounding with other lifestyle habits and societal habits. One of the chief ones being that couples are waiting longer and longer to have children. If you look over the last 25 years, the range at which a first-time couple is having a child just continues to increase. And one thing that the larger market is certainly aware of is the idea of a female biological clock. So we know that women have a absolute cliff starting at menopause when they're no longer able to procreate. On the male side, really what it is it's a curve where you kind of reach a typical peak male fertility around the age of 28. And then there's again, a steady decline from there. So it's a combination of factors that are compounded together that's leading to this infertility crisis. You said at the beginning of the talk, 1 in 7 couples can't get pregnant today. And the definition of infertility is actually a couple trying for a year and being unable to.
Wow.
And it is 1 in 7. So certainly this is a fairly significant and serious matter. And, one of the things that, we certainly are encouraged to continue to push in this space is, most conversations I have, whether it be with customers or partners or investors, is that everyone knows somebody that's had an infertility journey or story. Whether it's themselves or their siblings or a very close friend. So this is certainly a systemic issue. And we're really trying to, draw awareness on the space, but to layer in, accessible services that help to combat this problem.
Yeah, this is, I think it's a growing issue for many of the reasons that you've been able to illustrate. With your work with Dadi, can you kind of break down the elements that you're involving? Are you kind of looking at the factors that are contributing to it? Are you aggregating data? Are you providing resources for people? Can you kind of explain the whole business model of Dadi? And perhaps I would think, who is it that you're serving, and how is it that you've revolutionized kind of how people are approaching this? I guess that's the real question.
Yeah, so our mission at Dadi is to normalize the conversation around reproductive health. So chiefly, we're trying to draw awareness of male factor infertility. So all the elements you just mentioned and we just mentioned. What we do today is we offer the Dadi kit. So that's a service whereby we've taken the in-clinic experience of going into a fertility center or going into a sperm bank, masturbating in a little room, and then having the corresponding testing and storage taking place. And we moved it in the home experience for collection. So when you order the Dadi kit, it gets delivered to your home. In the comfort and security of your own home, you can collect into our cup. We've really tried to innovate in this space, and as such, we've designed a really quite a performant kit. So that the technical details here is when you collect into the cup, that semen needs to be mixed with a preservative to allow it to survive the overnight journey back to our lab. So when you collect, you screw on the lid and you hit a button on the lid, which releases a preservative. You place the cup back in the kit, and the kit itself is designed to maintain a specific thermal range, regardless of the outdoor environment. And that's important for the sperm to survive the journey back to the lab. So within 24 hours of collection and handing to FedEx, you receive a complete fertility report. That report is comparable to what existed in the existing industry. And then we store that deposit for free for a year. And then there's an annual subscription for $99 a year. The kit itself is $199. The equivalent service, if you went to a sperm bank or a fertility center, is $1,500 to $2,000.
Right.
So this is an order of magnitude more affordable. And if you think back to what our mission is to normalize the conversation and increase accessibility. So price was a huge part of this equation that we worked really, really hard to take a first principles approach on trying to bring that down. And the second was accessibility. And that's through being able to do it at home versus multiple visits to a doctor's, et cetera. And I think, a lot of your listeners, and I'm sure, you're very well aware on the male side specifically, we don't really have that habit of going to the doctor. Mm-hmm. And I think many men will find any excuse to not book one of those appointments. So by being able to change the entire experience and bring it in home, we've really expanded the overall market of who's getting tested when and where. To your question of who's engaging in the service today, it's really men in every single stage of life. So we have individuals that are in their teens. We have individuals that are in their 70s. If you look at teens, for example, a lot of those cases have to do with health-related issues. So oncology and cancer-related issues are huge. So similar to kind of the thing that sparked my interest in the space. And really the idea there is when you are sick with cancer, before you start chemotherapy, you should really get tested and stored so that you're able to be able to procreate and have that optionality in the future, when in many cases that won't be possible after chemotherapy. On the other end of the spectrum, so men in their 70s, that one's a little bit more maybe science fiction compared to hard science. I think what's remarkable about what we're actually doing is we're storing a key building block of life and a part of your biology. Literally little nodes of yourself and human sperm are being cryogenically stored. And when stored, they can actually survive for 200 years under those conditions. That's a theoretical 200 years because obviously they haven't modeled that. The industry is only 40 years old, but certainly 40 years has passed that test, and the theoretical limit is 200. Our median customer is an aging millennial, so someone in their kind of early 30s, late 20s, individuals who may or may not be in a relationship, and certainly just want to get themselves tested and be able to maintain that option into the future. So that's really who we service today.
So I guess there's a couple levels to this too, because you're talking about testing for men who might not be in a relationship as well. Because I think automatically one of the male psychological components is to not even consider the fact that they might be infertile, even though they are planning to have kids. Maybe they're going through their work career or their dating career or whatever and haven't quite locked things down. Because in a lot of cases, I think in today's world is much more complicated as far as economics. If you look at typically, getting a home, starting a family, all these things have been delayed extensively in industrialized nations. And for a lot of millennials, for example, home ownership is pretty much off the table for them. And one of the big social issues that we're certainly facing today. How does a guy I'm fascinated with the testing side of things, because this is something I think that realistically, if the average male's sperm count is down 50% from our ancestors at any given age, our likelihood of impregnating a female when we do get to that situation is going to be significantly lower. And it would be reasonable to assume that, hey, maybe I should get checked to see where I'm at, or at least hit myself in a more peak state for that other period of time. Is that part of the education that you're offering as well, like to get people aware of this, as guys in particular?
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, fundamentally, or I'll give you a great example. Take myself. When I turned 30, I was quite interested in going to the doctor, and I hadn't been for years. And when I went, I said, run the gambit. I want to know everything, about my current positioning. And, one of the things that was never brought up after that gambit of testing was my fertility. It would probably shock many of your listeners to find out that, infertility is impacted 1 in 10 men naturally. So we have individuals that, complete a Dadi kit and send it into us. And ultimately we look under the microscope and there's no sperm. The ejaculate looks totally normal. The volume, the viscosity, everything visually looks fine. But when you actually analyze it, there's no sperm there. And that 10% number is certainly a spectrum. So that would be the extreme end. And then there's kind of a bridge towards normalcy. But to your point, normalcy has changed. The WHO in 2010 released their 5th edition for the kind of markers of male fertility and what they perceive to be the 50th percentile, or what's normal. And quite honestly, men do not meet that threshold these days. And, I believe there's a concerted effort going on right now to kind of reevaluate those levels. So, certainly the subject of male fertility and fertility in general is really misunderstood. At Dadi, we spend, considerable amount of resource and time trying to educate customers. We're in the process of really building out an educational platform that will further kind of shed a light on this. And then we're trying to go beyond that and really trying to be a positive force in the industry more broadly. And we're doing that through research and data, as you mentioned. So, we have a really interesting study coming out later on this year with our partnership with one of our medical advisors from Johns Hopkins, where we actually took data, fertility levels, obviously anonymized, and customer privacy and protection is at the forefront of everything that we do. But we took that data at scale and provided it to Johns Hopkins, and they did a fantastic job kind of recalibrating infertility and fertility levels by zip code. And through that, they are beginning to further understand, what's impacting this, whether it be pollution or socioeconomic reasons. And all of that, I think, is going to, in the pursuit of trying to contribute to kind of normalizing and helping one understand the real facts and figures between male factor and fertility.
Well, so then what has the research shown so far? What are some of the factors? Because I guess there's another thing I'm thinking as well off the top of my head is like, okay, let's say I'm a 30-year-old guy. I want to have children one day. I'm thinking, I don't know where I'm at. So I'm going to go through this experimentation, and I find, I've got lower sperm counts than I want. Are we able to mitigate some factors? Do we know some factors that can change that? Because I could say, okay, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and a year from now, I might get a better count and things like that. So are you doing that kind of testing as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? Anything in the health area really is individual dependent, but certainly in many cases there are lifestyle factors that could be helped to reverse some of these elements. So, alcohol consumption, regular drug use, caffeine consumption, sleep, all of these factors have a big impact. I mean, I think one of the other things that's important to kind of recognize in this space is there's also a lot of variability in your day to day. So, a great example is when I was first kind of talking to different labs and looking to partner, I was instructed that, if, for example, I took a 5-hour plane flight on a given day across country, the pressure and the heat that comes from sitting in that seat could have an impact on my daily production of sperm that day. If you take that same concept and you kind of apply that more broadly, you look at activities like biking, putting a hot laptop directly on your lap. I mean, these are kind of myths that certainly have been around in society, but in fact, they are fundamentally true. So there certainly are kind of macro factors and some micro factors that you can implement in your own life to improve these scores. But more fundamentally, Wade, as you mentioned, the first step is really getting tested to establish whether there's a problem or not, and then from there, talking to a medical professional to understand what can be done to try to improve that.
That's really helpful, and I'm all about testing and then experimenting and moving forward. Are there any factors, we know the kind of the things that might be driving it down? Is there anything that you guys have been able to conclude leads to increased factors like positive components? Is it exercise? Is it dietary adjustments? Is it, what might those elements be if you have that data, or maybe you don't?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a little bit more time before we're able to, at scale, be able to prove out some of these factors. Again, like, we're just at the early stages of shining a light on this overall industry. But I think one of the other things that's worth mentioning that you brought up is, taking the situation today that's happening quite often between two couples. I mean, you mentioned home ownership, right? Home ownership is really pointing to this idea of economic infertility, which is what it's known in the kind of academic world, where it's really expensive to have a child today, even if you can do it through natural means. Yes. And the competitiveness is only increasing. So what's happening to a lot of individuals that are, within my generation, is they're waiting longer to have a child. And that waiting longer, again, begins to compound these factors together. That's leading to this 15% of couples who aren't able to conceive through natural means. The second factor is finding the right person. In today's environment, dating is difficult, and certainly the move to online, I think, broadens the available, let's say, inventory or scope of who you have access to, but doesn't necessarily lead to you, finding that right person any sooner. So really, the economic infertility and waiting to find a partner is also leading to delays, which is also being combined with these lifestyle factors and environmental factors and causing this larger issue.
Wow, that's insightful. What happens once you've got your sperm stored, and what kind of innovations or technology might be happening around improving fertility? Like, was that artificial insemination, whether that's in vitro or in vivo, all that sort of stuff? Can you kind of shed some light on if there's any developments, or what happens after you have it stored?
Yeah, so starting with the storage, which is really key. One of the things that we looked at when evaluating the male fertility space is, typically when a deposit is collected, so this would be something in clinic, what they would do is they would take the volume of that, and they would fill it into a vial and then put it into a tank. And depending on the amount of volume for a given individual, they might aliquot that or divide that into one, maybe two vials. To your point, when you look at, IUI or IVF or ICSI, which is the kind of newer form of in vitro fertilization, less sperm is ultimately needed over time. So one of the innovations that we brought on the Dadi side is we automatically take every deposit and divide it into 3 vials. Those 3 vials give every customer an opportunity to have 3 chances to fertilize from one single collection. Because ultimately, when you post-thaw that deposit, so you take it out of that cryo tank, you can't freeze it again.
Right.
So if you really only have one vial, you're kind of all one and done right then and there. So we focused on trying to innovate on how much or your number of opportunities from a single collection. And then again, if you kind of look at the ecosystem of IVF, the technology is certainly getting better. The 10% number that you kind of quoted before, I believe that relates to IUI, which is, the kind of the simplest of the three versions of IVF. ICSI, which is on the other side of the spectrum. I mean, these are all ultimately, reproductive, assisted reproductive technologies, but ICSI on the other end.
Can you share with that just for our listeners so they know what that technical terms would be?
Yes, intraclytoplasmic sperm injection. Sorry, my bad.
Well, that's a super fragilistic XBL show. Those kind of words. I always like to get what those are. Just what does that mean? I think
I mean, the real difference is if you take kind of IVF, what it's really about is taking an egg and surrounding it with 50,000 sperm and letting one wiggle into the egg to fertilize it. And typically the fertilization rate is, around 35% for IVF. ICSI is really a pretty incredible and new innovative space where ultimately they take one egg and they take one sperm. They immobilize the sperm in many cases. They chop off the tail and actually stick it directly into the egg to fertilize. And that has roughly kind of a 60% fertilization rate. So still, there's a lot of work to be done on the technological side to improve that fertilization rate, but certainly we are heading in the right direction, which is really important. And, when you think about, what it is that the Dadi's trying to offer is we're trying to give our customers as many opportunities to fertilize as possible. And, we really believe that the entire IVF industry is heading towards ICSI.
Is there any known things that are causing drops in sperm that you're absolutely sure of? So for example, I knew a considerable number of people in the bodybuilding industry who were using steroids, and I would like to separate maybe steroid use versus testosterone replacement. So there's two levels to that game. So steroid use for our listeners are, athletes and oftentimes those who are concerned about cosmetic ideals will engage in the use of anabolic steroids to enhance their physique. And then either for athletic performance or cosmetic reasons. So that's one thing. And then there's testosterone replacement therapy, which is increasing amongst, I know half a dozen guys in the online internet space who I'm friends with that are, 30, like deviation of 3-4 years, who are on testosterone replacement therapy. Some of them are trying to have kids and are having a difficult time. So do you know any data on that? Because that's become much more pervasive than it was, say, 20, 30 years ago.
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others is a total game changer. Suddenly you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with Masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's masszymes.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
Yeah, absolutely. By no means am I an expert in this space, but we certainly do know that steroid usage blocks a lot of the receptors and signals from the appropriate hormones. Now, I think one of the things that is at least somewhat positive is it does seem, we've looked at some research from Mayo Clinic and a number of other institutions that does show that when stopping that usage, it does seem to come back. But ultimately, certainly if you're about to begin a cycle and to head into that space, we would certainly recommend that you kind of test and store, because ultimately you don't know what is happening. I think that the golden rule here is, like in the case of fertility is really mapped to your health. And it's quite clear that taking certain drugs and steroids and these types of activities have an impact on your health. So it would be logical to assume that there would be an impact there. And certainly before you undergo anything like that, especially at a younger age, it would make sense to get yourself tested and stored.
Well, that's one of the separations, and you might not know this because it might be something for an endocrinologist, but is the difference between steroid use versus testosterone replacement. And for people who are determining the difference, steroid use is using super physiological over and above dosages to create an anabolic response in the body. And that may have long-term detrimental effects. Short-term, it's probably not that marginal, particularly with injectables. But with testosterone replacement therapy, that's the use of either creams or injections on a moderate basis in order to get testosterone levels to normal, what would be considered normal, because we're seeing a real crash here of testosterone levels. To give you an example, I think it's in the 1970s. Today, the average person in their 20s has the testosterone levels of a man in their 70s, in the 70s.
Wow.
So we're seeing, whether that's blue light, electromagnetic frequencies, whether it's toxins in the diet, we don't know exactly what it is, but the results are quite significant. And what I do know, which has been proposed by some people, is high levels of blue light stimulation can throw circadian rhythms and also cause high levels of cortisol, which can suppress testosterone levels. Are you guys tracking any information or research in regards to the difference between steroid use or testosterone therapy and its impact on fertility?
So we're not. There certainly has been a little bit of discussion from other groups where we might partake in certain studies. I think for us, what we really focus on is trying to run an optimized service, right? Yeah. Trying to make sure that individuals have access to this in all 50 states. I mean, another good example of access is, the US itself actually has a fairly well-developed cryo network and footprint. Other countries around the world, even in Western Europe, have very limited access to these types of services in general, but there's still broad swaths of the population who don't have access to sperm banks or cryo centers. And certainly we operate on the FedEx network, so I believe it's 98% of the country is ultimately covered, and we do have customers from every single state as a result. So we don't specifically have any kind of active projects in testosterone or in steroid usage, but we certainly know that it's an impact, and we certainly hear from customers that who are thinking about engaging in these services speak to us first.
Okay, great. So what do you anticipate is coming down the road for Dadi and what you're going? So what's the future and vision of the company, since obviously your convenience factor, and then also you have some data aggregation factor that I think that's going to be very superior, just out of convenience and cost effectiveness. What do you anticipate is going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, considering the challenge that's present that you guys are feeling?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for us, we really pioneered this direct-to-consumer experience for male fertility. What's beginning to happen now is we're starting to partner with more and more large organizations. So this is both on the medical side, so hospitals and fertility clinics themselves, who see the benefits of having a service like ours be completed. COVID certainly helped to accelerate a lot of these behaviors. The idea of going into a clinic and sitting around with a bunch of people and then going into another smaller room is a bit of a nightmare, increasingly so during COVID. So we certainly see a further kind of decentralization of sperm testing and storage, and Dadi wants to be and plans to be on the forefront of that. I think the other thing that we see is, we think this infertility space, which is measured in the kind of tens of billions today domestically, has an opportunity to grow significantly beyond that as more and more couples are impacting and the technology gets better and the need continues to increase. So as an organization, we're really a collection of kind of product service operators. We see opportunities on the female side that are largely not tackled and kind of poorly serviced today. When we also see opportunities on the IVF side on a deep kind of technological level. So for us, we're at the start of this, again, 2.5 years into this journey, but we certainly have a long-term thinking approach to how we want to tackle this space. And, we call it the fertility stack. So the different layers of services that are involved here. And, we're starting at the bottom, but we see opportunities to kind of reinvent and bring the kind of product expertise and the modernization and the price and accessibility to many more aspects of the fertility space.
We'll kind of go into a fun direction here because my brain always kind of extrapolates of what's possible. Do you anticipate that we will enter into an age in the future where we get into the situation of like thoroughbred? So I grew up on a farm, and my dad worked on a horse farm, and then they were using mechanical insemination to stud out various horses. And then I'm thinking, well, what would like Elon Musk's sperm be worth to certain groups of individuals who might be infertile? Or, what would, your favorite scientist or person based on the value or athletic ability or things like that might be, kind of a weird thing where people are actually selling off their value. Because one of the things that I think is kind of, we're going to do a fun little thought experiment here on the Awesome Health
totally.
Podcast,
Let's do it.
Which is one of the things that we see emerging right now from a technology standpoint is, number one, the development of robotic sex partners, which is now a new trend. And of course, we have pornography, which has impacted relationships. And now we're going to go to the next level, which is started. It's very popular in some countries that are experiencing differences between male and female populations. Like you look at China and Japan in particular, which are in dire population collapses. So the common threads right now are, hey, we're going to have too many people on the planet. But if you actually do the numbers, we're more likely to experience population collapse, particularly because we have a lot of older people, not a lot of younger people. And many of the social programs which the older population is dependent on would enslave the younger people to this. And then we have inflationary aspects and all those kind of components. But with robotics, I can see a lot of men opting out of the game, and like particularly younger males digitally, hey, you know what? I can buy a robot girl for $15,000, and I can get another one and another one, and just kind of go through this and get my sexual needs met, and not have the responsibility or the financial responsibility of being in a divorce situation or an economic situation that I can't maintain or manage. Do you anticipate that there will be these kind of things started to emerge in this new society?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is obviously just a thought exercise here, but, I think the one for me is probably porn. Porn has certainly changed a lot of behaviors within my generation, and those behaviors have certainly had impacts on relationships. I think, again, through the result of COVID, I mean, there's been some disturbing statistics that have coming out around, how often men are engaging in masturbation and viewing pornography.
What
if you combine,
can you share that?
yeah, I mean, again, like I don't want to kind of misquote here, but I believe it was something like, and I heard this on the Recode podcast from Scott Galloway, but ultimately it was that, men on average are masturbating 3 times a day in certain demographics as a result of COVID. Yeah, and that's up by a significant margin from what existed previously. I think if you combine that with a sex robot, as you're describing, and the ability to obviously not have to engage with another sexual partner, elements and technologies like VR and other things that continue to kind of close the walls and don't promote further engagement between couples and individuals. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for a real dark future whereby artificial insemination, whether it be IVF, ICSI, or IUI, all play a really significant role in the kind of procreation story. I mean, Japan is definitely a significantly impacted nation. They actually have the highest infertility levels of any developed nation. You combine that with an aging population and a decreasing birth rate, it's causing an effect where these technologies are going to be crucial for the ability for that culture and that society to maintain certain levels. So, yeah, I mean,
China has another issue coming because of their one-child policy, which the tradition was to have more males than females, and so we have a massive part of the Chinese culture that is not going to father children or have to go external to the traditional methodologies of before. So we're seeing already impacts of social engineering, if you will.
Yeah, actually, I think on the China side, I was listening to an Economist article this week. I believe they just increased that to three children per family. So they're clearly seeing and modeling out, the direction this is heading, and trying to promote further behaviors. The real question is, how easy is that for a lot of couples to execute? Because it isn't as clear cut as it was back in the day. So these thresholds might even fundamentally not be met. So yeah, there's certainly some dark skies in that regard potentially on the horizon. But I think to kind of bring it back to kind of present day, it's really around gathering information and educating yourself. You said yourself, Wade, you love to test and you love to kind of understand. I'm one of those people as well. I've tried every device. I'm a kind of a product tester by nature. One of the areas that I'm looking deeply into right now is just how to optimize sleep. And I think fundamentally all of these behaviors do lead to hopefully better results on the fertility spectrum, but it really starts with getting tested.
Yeah. Trying to sleep in New York, every time I go there, it's almost impossible. There's a buzz in that city that makes sleeping. I remember staying at the infamous Chelsea Hotel one time.
Right.
And I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't sleep for whatever that hum in New York. And I go downstairs and the lobby is like no other hotel lobby I've ever seen at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm going, does anybody sleep around here? I talked to one of the guys. I just he's like, no, I moved here 17 years ago. I haven't slept since.
Yeah.
and the other guys laughed and they all just kind of agreed with it. And that was which is kind of the common thread of New York. And of course, when you get into these industrialized areas, are you seeing with the Hopkins research differences between being inside an industrialized city versus being in a rural city? Is that legit or is that total fallacy?
One of the results from the study, which will be published later on this summer, was really around pollution. The pollution and those environmental factors did have a correlated effect on one's fertility. So certainly, the opportunity to be out in the countryside in a more rural setting did seem to have a correlation and an effect.
That's very interesting. And is any of those impacts related to fluoride? I know that was brought up recently. So there's fluorine, which is naturally occurring element, and then there's fluoride. And I know there was some CDC information, which was, I thought, fantastic. I read in Dr. Tennant's book, Healing is Voltage, and demonstrated states that use fluoride versus states that don't have dramatically higher obesity levels with the
Oh,
use
wow.
of fluoride. It's significant, and there doesn't seem to be any legitimate statistical evidence that supports the use of fluoride in water, even though it's pervasive in many different cultures. If you don't have research on that, I think that would be a good one to check out, because I think when fluoride goes through the next level of scrutiny, and I think it's starting at the Weinsteins we're talking about on Dark Horse, I think that could be a culprit, because of course it was used for sterilization in World War II by the Nazis.
Yeah, so no data on that specifically, but no, I'll absolutely mention it to the team, and I think it's a great point. I heard when I work out in the morning, I listen to The Economist most mornings, and another thing that was talked a lot about was inside air quality. For example, and its effect on health. And again, it wasn't directly related to fertility or infertility, but fundamentally, it's all connected. So, I think as a result of COVID and some of the funding and research that's been happening, hopefully many more aspects of the way that we live will be examined, and we can only hope that will then translate into higher fertility levels or improved fertility levels. But let's wait and see.
What are some other services that you are looking at offering here in the future?
Yeah, so we're actually in like kind of heavy development phase. So we are planning on releasing some new information on some services in the next couple of months. Which is probably the worst answer to kind of give.
I understand there's some proprietary issues that are involved, so I just thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like when we're getting ready to launch, look, let's definitely look to set up a conversation about it, because I think we have some really cool and interesting things kind of in the works with some new experts in some other fields. But we as an organization, we're really focused on fertility and infertility, so everything is kind of within that ecosystem.
Beautiful. Is there any other items that you'd like to share with our audience that we haven't covered in this episode that you think are important that I might have skipped over or missed?
Yeah, I think the fundamental kind of message, and again, we're a service called Dadi, and we'd love to engage with anyone who's looking for additional information. We're actually in the process of releasing a kind of a free ebook on the beginning to end. The soup to nuts, if you want to draw that pun out there, but on male fertility. But I think fundamentally, it's really power comes from education, and power comes from optionality. And given how underserved the male fertility market is today, and how little education information is put out there, we'd really invite anyone to engage with the Dadi service and at a baseline get tested. Again, we give everyone a year of free storage, so they have an opportunity to decide whether storage is right for them. It is free to cancel, so there's no kind of hidden costs in our proposition or our offering. But we're really trying to just be a change maker in the space and draw that awareness and normalize that conversation. So, it's podcasts like yourself that help us get the word out there. And we're, excited to talk to anybody who wants to learn more. So please reach out to us at DADIKIT, dadikit.com, and we're happy to provide any information.
That's awesome. And do you have any other resources like social media or things that you're doing that people can kind of follow and learn more or stay up to date as they kind of engage in this process?
Yep. So we're on social. So, you can go to our Instagram account, which we're in the process of just relaunching now. So that's at DaddyKit on Insta. But really, in the next couple of days, so by the time this airs, certainly, we will have a brand new educational portal on our website. With tons of resource and articles and a number of other factors that are there. And then, as the year progresses, our involvement in research, as I mentioned, will continue to increase. We're just at the point now where we've been in business long enough that we've gathered this data. and we've engaging with our medical advisors at Stanford and Johns Hopkins and Walter Reed to kind of put the best information out there. And I think in the coming years, we really hope to be an engine that helps us support the research side just as much as the service side.
Well, this is very exciting. I love the fact that you've been able to bring down the cost and the convenience of being able to store. I think that's a great issue. I know I've had a number of friends that have gone through that process. And if you can make that an easier transition, I think more men would be supportive or engaged in that process. So congrats on that. And we look forward to hearing regular updates about the aggregation of this data and what we can do for positive impact in regards to reducing the things that are lowering sperm counts and potentially finding out what the things are to increase sperm counts. So thank you, Tom, for joining us today. And for all our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And more importantly, for our female listeners and our male listeners, look, if you're a lady that's looking to get impregnated by your partner, maybe have this conversation, turn them onto this site. It's not a loss of masculinity just because you might be suffering from infertility. It's actually an opportunity to engage in the processes and procedures that allow you to, make the next generation of kids come forward. And I think that's a great thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Wade. No, it's been great.
All right, there you have it. Another edition of the podcast. Let me know if you liked it. You can smash the like button, share it, and put it out to the people who might be in that situation and not know how to breach the subject. I think this topic is great, and we hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you very soon.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Turn cultured foods into superfoods. Raw fermented foods like sauerkraut and low sugar live yogurt can be good for you, but rarely have enough of the right probiotic strains for therapeutic benefit. So here's a way that you can turn them into superfoods. What I do is I get some raw sauerkraut or a healthy yogurt. Ideally, it's grass-fed or coconut-based, and you can empty 3 caps of P3OM into a container and mix it up thoroughly. Leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours before putting it back into the fridge. And what's going to happen is these probiotic levels will be multiplied. In fact, it doubles every 20 minutes. And then what you're going to get is you're going to have a food with strong proteolytic activity. To learn more about P3OM and why its patented strains make it the strongest probiotic available, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.